Hi everyone, I'm Danielle Ramsey with Building the Blog, and in this video, I'm going to give you 10 tips for choosing an amazing domain name for your blog. Now you might be wondering, what exactly is a domain name? A domain name is simply the address used to find your website online. It's what people type into their browsers to find a specific website. For example, my domain name is buildingtheblog.com. It's important that you choose a great domain name so that your website's easy to find. To do this, you'll want a domain name that's memorable, spam-free, and optimized for SEO. Now, this is a tall order, especially considering today there are more than 350 million registered domain names. That means your first choice is probably going to be taken. But with these 10 tips, you'll be able to choose a great domain name in no time at all. Also note that in the description of this video, I've added a link so that you can check to see if the domain names you like are already taken or if they're available. Alright, so now let's jump into the tips. Tip number 1 is to avoid spam signals. Now there are some tips in this video that are optional. This one isn't. You absolutely want to follow these rules to ensure that you have a spam-free domain name. So rule number 1, avoid dashes. You really want to be careful with this one because it's tempting. You'll find a domain name that's already taken, so a lot of places like GoDaddy will recommend, well, just put a dash in between your words. This seems harmless enough, but dashes are actually very strong spam signals, so just don't do it. Rule number 2 is to stick to .com if at all possible. It might be tempting to go with a .tech, .solutions, or another .domain name, but these are not respected by Google. It's just best to stick to .com. And if you really want a domain name, .net and .co are acceptable alternatives. Rule number 3 is to avoid numbers, and when I say numbers, I really mean numerals. Numbers 1 through 9 are very strong indicators of a spam website. You also just want to stay away from numbers in general because they can be confusing when you're typing out your domain. I'll get into this a little bit later. Rule number 4 is to invest in an SSL. SSLs give you an HTTPS address, and they also give you that little lock symbol next to your address in the URL bar. An SSL not only makes your visitors more secure, it's also better for SEO and for telling search engines that you're not a spam website. Tip number 2 is to include a keyword related to your blog or website's topic or niche. This is really important for SEO specifically, but it's also great for brandability because it helps your visitors instantly know what your website is all about. Now you don't want to overdo it though, so be careful. Just one keyword is enough. Otherwise, you're going to start to look spammy. For example, buildingtheblog.com. One keyword in there is blog. The others have nothing to do with my niche. An example of a domain name you wouldn't want to choose if you had a website about blogging would be blogonlinewebsite.com. This is going to look spammy not only to search engines, but also to your visitors. If you're struggling to come up with a list of keywords related to your topic, I recommend using thesaurus.com to come up with 3 to 5 alternatives as you're brainstorming domain names. Tip number 3 is to try using a longer 2 to 3 word domain name. Now, it is important that you still keep your domain name to 15 characters or fewer. And it's also true that in general, shorter domain names are better. But again, there are more than 350 million registered domain names, so sometimes you just have to get creative if you want to get your domain name right. And if you have a domain name that makes sense, like Building the Blog. Now, if Building the Blog were just a random mix of 15 characters, you wouldn't want to do it this way. So make sure if you do choose a longer domain name, that domain name makes sense when it's read aloud. Plus, there are lots of techniques you can use to make your longer domain names more memorable. Which brings me to technique number 4. Use phonetic patterns like alliteration and rhyming to make your domain name more memorable. Now, you might be wondering, what is alliteration? Alliteration is simply putting 2 words together that have the same starting sound. For example, building, blog. I use this alliteration technique with my own website. There are also several famous real-life brands that have used the same technique. For example, Coca-Cola, PayPal, and Gorilla Glue. Rhyming is another great technique for making your brand name more memorable. Famous brands that have incorporated this technique include StubHub, Lean Cuisine, and 7-Eleven. You can use a free online tool like rhymezone.com to come up with a list of rhyming words. What I recommend doing is using a list of 3 to 5 words related to your niche and typing it into this tool to come up with some great domain name options. Tip number 5 is to bring your brand and domain name to life with sensory words. Sensory words are just words that appeal to one of the 5 senses, so sight, taste, touch, sound, and smell words. Now this might not be a strategy that works with all blog topics and niches, but this strategy can work particularly well if you're in a blog topic that has anything to do with food, essential oils maybe, or music. Anything that has to do with working with one of those 5 senses. Now here are a few famous examples of brands that have used sensory words in their brand names. For sight, there's Clear Sight, which is a one-day contact brand. There's Crystal Pepsi. If you lived through the 90s, you probably remember that beverage. And then for taste, there's Sour Patch Kids, Juicy Fruit. For touch, there's Snuggles, Sunsilk, which is a hair product. Sound, Nestle Crunch, Beats by Dr. Dre headphones. And for smell, there's Old Spice and HelloFresh. If you're looking for some ideas for sensory words, check the video description where I have a link to the companion blog post to this video, and there's a list of sensory words that you might like there. So tip number 6 is pretty fun. It is to incorporate a mascot into your domain name. Now what I like about this strategy is, especially if you're artistic, you can make a really fun logo and incorporate your mascot throughout your blog or website. Some examples of brands that have done this are MailChimp, Mr. Clean, and SurveyMonkey. Tip number 7 is to use a metaphor or reference. And a lot of the biggest brands in the world were named using this strategy. For example, Amazon was named for the Amazon River to suggest scale. Nike was named for the Greek goddess of victory. And Corona means king in Spanish. To use a metaphor for your own domain name, think about borrowing places from around the world or words from other cultures. An important note though, you do want to be careful not to use a word that has special cultural meaning. An example of this is not too long ago, Kim Kardashian decided to launch her own shapewear brand. She was originally going to call it kimono, and this instantly received a ton of backlash. She even got a letter from the mayor of Kyoto, Japan. So you really want to be careful and make sure that you're not using a word that could potentially offend an entire group of people. A quick Google should give you an idea of whether or not that word is appropriate. Tip number 8, if you still can't think of a domain name you like, consider inventing a word. Now, inventing a word can be risky because they're going to inherently be harder to remember and less obvious how to spell. But on the upside, what's great about a made-up word is you're going to be more likely to find a shorter .com domain name, and you can assign your own meaning to the word. Think about how Google has become synonymous with search, and a Kodak moment is used to represent a special moment in time. And Xerox is often used in place of copy. To make up a word, you can try combining words that haven't been used together before. Examples include awesome sauce and chigging. You can also modify an existing word by adding prefixes like dis, meta, or in, or suffixes like ifi, eyes, able, ton, and ini. You can also try using a fake word generator. I found a pretty good one at randomwordgenerator.com, and I have a link to that tool in the description below. If you do decide to go the made-up word route, please make sure that it's still short, pronounceable, and easy to guess how to spell. Which brings me to tip number 9. No matter what, you want to make sure your name is easy to type and remember. I'm going to start with a little bit of a story that you may or may not know. Amazon was almost named Cadabra, but Jeff Bezos received feedback from some people that it was being heard as cadaver, and it was also hard to guess how to spell. That's why he ultimately decided to go with Amazon.com as his name. So here are a few tips. For one, you want to say your name out loud and make sure that when you say it, it's not easily misheard as something else. You also want to make sure you don't include dashes. I mentioned this before because it's a spam signal, but also when you include dashes in your name, people are easily forget whether or not to include them. Another thing you want to do is if you have 2 words in your domain name, avoid having the first word end in the same letter that the second word starts with. That's because it creates these unnatural double and triple letter combinations that are easy for people to mistype into their browser's URL bar. Some examples of this are fall leaves, hit training, travel light. When you see these typed out, you can see how it's easy for people to accidentally add or remove those letters. Another thing you want to do is avoid homonyms. Homonyms are words that sound the same but are spelled differently. Common homonym examples include here, by, ate, and ant. Using homonyms like these just make misspellings much more frequent. Unless the context is super obvious, I would avoid using homonyms in your domain name. You also want to avoid numbers. Now, numerals are associated with spam, but even if you spell out your number, it's going to cause confusion among people. Should I type in the number? Should I spell it out? It's just best to avoid numbers all around for that reason. Finally, you want to avoid acronyms. Unless you happen to score a 3-letter domain name, which is virtually impossible today, domains with random letters are easily misheard and hard to remember. My final tip number 10, is if you're still stuck, try using a domain name generator. My personal favorite domain name tool is bustaname.com. Even though this website looks a little outdated, it actually works really well. You can put in a list of keywords you like, and Bustaname will automatically spit out some combinations that are available. You can learn more about how to use this tool in my companion article in the video description below. Alright, that's it for the tips. Now you may be wondering, once you have your domain name figured out, what's next? Well, ideally you'd be buying your domain name from your hosting provider, so something like bluehost.com. If you already have hosting, you can buy your domain name from a site like namecheap.com or GoDaddy. Every year you keep your domain, you'll need to pay a renewal fee to keep it. Usually the cost is around $10 to $15 for a year. If your blog or website isn't created yet, I recommend the hosting provider Bluehost. They will provide you with a free domain name for 1 year, give you a free SSL, which is great for SEO and showing that you're not a spammy site. Plus, they have a super simple one-click WordPress install. I have a discounted coupon link to Bluehost in the comments of this video. I do receive a commission from Bluehost if you purchase through this link, but it adds no additional cost to you, and you actually receive a discount off the normal price. Plus, it will help support this channel, so I'd really appreciate it if you do need hosting, if you'd check out that link. Alright, that's it for this video. If you were able to use any of these tips to come up with your own domain name, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Let me know what tip you used and which domain name you came up with. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a like and a subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.